Rescue story. Saving a lion cub trapped in a hunter's net. The sun was merciless that morning in the Masai Mara, casting long shadows across the acacia-dotted savanna as Ranger Kofi Mensah began his daily patrol. The radio crackled with static as he adjusted the frequency, hoping for clearer communication with the base camp. What he heard instead would change everything about this seemingly routine morning. Emergency call from Sector 7. The voice was urgent, barely audible through the interference. Possible snare trap, ... young lion. Immediate assistance required, ... Kofi's heart sank. Snare traps were the bane of every conservationist's existence. Cruel, indiscriminate devices that caught anything unfortunate enough to stumble into their path. He grabbed his emergency kit and radioed his position, knowing that every minute could mean the difference between life and death for whatever animal was trapped. The drive to Sector 7 took him through some of the most beautiful yet treacherous terrain in Kenya. Red dust clouds followed his vehicle as he navigated between termite mounds and scattered rocks, his mind racing with possibilities. In his 15 years as a wildlife ranger, he had seen too many animals suffer at the hands of poachers and illegal hunters. Each rescue was personal, each loss a weight he carried in his heart. As he approached the coordinates, Kofi could hear something that made his blood run cold, the desperate, plaintive cries of a very young animal in distress. He parked his vehicle and grabbed his binoculars, scanning the area carefully. Poachers sometimes booby-trapped their snares or remained nearby to collect their catch. The last thing he wanted was to walk into an ambush. Through the tall grass about 50 meters away, he spotted movement. A small golden form was struggling against what appeared to be a complex network of ropes and netting. As he focused his binoculars, his worst fears were confirmed. It was a lion cub, no more than 4 months old, completely entangled in what looked like a hunting net rather than a simple snare. The cub was exhausted from struggling, its tiny body heaving with each labored breath. The net was wound tightly around its legs and torso, and Kofi could see that the more the cub moved, the tighter the trap became. This wasn't just a snare. This was something far more sophisticated and deliberately cruel. Kofi approached slowly, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. The cub looked up at him with wide, amber eyes filled with fear and pain. Its small muzzle was dry, indicating severe dehydration, and there were visible cuts where the rope had dug into its fur. The ranger's heart ached as he realized this little one had probably been trapped for at least a day, possibly longer. "Easy, little one," Kofi whispered, kneeling beside the trapped cub. "I'm here to help you." The cub weakly tried to growl, more from instinct than any real threat. Kofi could see that the animal was barely conscious, its strength nearly depleted from the ordeal. He began examining the net carefully, trying to determine the best way to free the cub without causing additional injury. The complexity of the trap was unlike anything he had seen before. This wasn't the work of local poachers using simple wire snares. The netting was commercial grade, designed to tighten progressively as the animal struggled. Whoever had set this trap had sophisticated equipment and knowledge of animal behavior. This was the work of professionals. As Kofi worked to cut the first layer of netting, he heard the distant sound of vehicles approaching. His blood ran cold. If these were the poachers returning to check their trap, he and the cub were in serious danger. He quickly radioed for backup, but knew help was at least 30 minutes away. The sound grew louder, and soon Kofi could make out multiple vehicles, heavy trucks by the sound of their engines. He grabbed his rifle and positioned himself protectively over the cub, ready to defend them both if necessary. The small lion seemed to sense the danger and pressed closer to him, its tiny body trembling. If this story is touching your heart, please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button to support more wildlife rescue content like this. 3 large vehicles came into view, kicking up massive dust clouds as they approached. Kofi's finger hovered over his radio trigger, ready to call for immediate assistance. But as the vehicles drew closer, he noticed something that made him lower his weapon. These weren't the usual poacher trucks. These were official wildlife department vehicles, and leading the convoy was a Land Rover. He recognized Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the region's head veterinarian, emerged from the lead vehicle, followed by what appeared to be a full wildlife response team. But Kofi's relief was short-lived when he saw who else stepped out of the vehicles. Marcus Venter, a man whose reputation preceded him throughout East Africa. Venter was a legendary figure in African conservation, a former big-game hunter turned wildlife protector who had spent the last 2 decades using his wealth and influence to fight against the very industry he had once been part of. Standing well over 6 feet tall with weathered skin and piercing blue eyes, he commanded respect wherever he went. More importantly, he had connections and resources that could move mountains, or in this case, could turn a simple rescue into something much more significant. Kofi, Dr. Mitchell called out as she approached with her medical kit. "We got your emergency call. How bad is it?" "It's a young cub, maybe 4 months old," Kofi replied, not moving from his protective position over the animal. "But this isn't a simple snare, doctor. This is something much more sophisticated." Venter approached and knelt beside the trap, his experienced eyes immediately recognizing what they were dealing with. His expression darkened as he examined the netting. "This is a capture net," he said grimly. "High-grade equipment used by professional animal traffickers. They're not trying to kill this cub. They want it alive for the illegal pet trade." The implications hit everyone immediately. Live lion cubs could sell for tens of thousands of dollars on the black market, destined for private collectors or roadside attractions in countries with weak animal protection laws. The sophistication of this trap meant they were dealing with an organized crime syndicate, not local poachers. "We need to move fast," Venter continued. "If they're using equipment like this, they'll be back to check their traps soon, and they won't be coming alone, doctor." Mitchell began her examination of the cub while Kofi and Venter worked together to carefully cut away the netting. The little lion was in worse condition than initially apparent, severely dehydrated, with several deep cuts from the rope and showing signs of shock. But its eyes still held that spark of wild spirit that made lions the kings of the African savanna. "She's a fighter, doctor," Mitchell murmured as she administered fluid therapy through a small 4. "Female cubs are often more resilient than males. If we can get her stabilized, she has a good chance." As they worked, Venter shared what he knew about the trafficking operation they were likely dealing with. His sources had been tracking a sophisticated network that had been targeting young predators across several East African countries. They used high-tech equipment, had inside information about wildlife movement patterns, and most disturbingly seemed to have corrupted officials within various wildlife departments. "This cub isn't just a victim," Venter explained as they finally freed her from the last of the netting. "She's evidence. If we can trace this equipment, we might be able to bring down an entire trafficking network." The cub, now free but too weak to run, allowed Dr. Mitchell to continue her treatment. The veterinarian worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning wounds, administering antibiotics, and providing much-needed nutrition through the 4. Slowly, the little lion's condition began to stabilize, but their moment of relief was interrupted by the sound of more vehicles approaching from the opposite direction. These didn't sound like official wildlife vehicles. The engines were louder, less refined. Venter immediately recognized the potential threat. "Everyone in the vehicles now," he ordered. "We need to move this cub to safety immediately, doctor." Mitchell carefully lifted the sedated cub, wrapping her in a blanket while maintaining the IV line. Kofi gathered the cut netting as evidence, while Venter's security team prepared for a potential confrontation. The approaching vehicles were getting closer, and there was no doubt about their intentions. As they loaded into the vehicles, Kofi couldn't help but look back at the site where they had found the cub. How many other animals had suffered in traps like this? How many hadn't been lucky enough to be found in time? The questions burned in his mind as they drove away, the rescued cub breathing steadily in Dr. Mitchell's arms. The drive back to the wildlife facility was tense. Venter was on his satellite phone, coordinating with law enforcement agencies across 3 countries. This rescue had inadvertently uncovered what appeared to be a major international trafficking operation, and the implications were staggering. "The equipment used in that trap," Venter explained during the drive. "It's manufactured by only 3 companies worldwide. All of them are supposed to sell exclusively to legitimate wildlife management organizations and zoos. If we can trace the serial numbers, we can identify who's been selling to traffickers." Dr. Mitchell continued monitoring the cub's vital signs during the journey. The little lion was responding well to treatment, her breathing becoming stronger and more regular. But beyond her physical recovery, there was another challenge looming. What would happen to her long term? "She's too young to survive on her own, doctor," Mitchell explained. "And we don't know what happened to her pride. She'll need extensive rehabilitation before she can be considered for release back into the wild." This was where Ventora's resources and connections would prove invaluable. He had been funding wildlife rehabilitation programs across Africa, and his foundation operated one of the most successful predator reintroduction programs on the continent. More importantly, he had the political influence to ensure that this cub's rescue would lead to meaningful action against the trafficking network. At the wildlife facility, the cub was immediately taken to the veterinary clinic for comprehensive examination and treatment. X-rays revealed no broken bones, but the rope burns were extensive and would require weeks of careful medical attention. Despite everything she had endured, the cub showed remarkable spirit, already trying to eat small amounts of food and showing curiosity about her surroundings. "We'll call her Amara, doctor," Mitchell announced. "It means eternal in Swahili. She's going to need that kind of strength for what lies ahead." Over the following days, the investigation into the trafficking network accelerated rapidly. The equipment analysis revealed connections to criminal organizations operating across Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. More shocking still, phone records and financial transactions uncovered corruption within wildlife departments, with officials being paid to provide information about animal locations and patrol schedules. Venter worked tirelessly, using his network of contacts in government, law enforcement, and international conservation organizations. What had started as a simple animal rescue was evolving into a major international investigation. Interpol became involved, along with wildlife crime units from multiple countries. But the most important development was happening in the rehabilitation facility. Amara was not just surviving, she was thriving. Under the careful care of Dr. Mitchell and her team, the little cub was gaining weight. Her wounds were healing and her personality was beginning to emerge. She was playful, curious, and showed no signs of the trauma that might have been expected after such an ordeal. "She's remarkable, Doctor," Mitchell observed as they watched Amara play with enrichment toys in her enclosure. "Most animals that go through what she experienced show significant behavioral issues, but she seems to have an incredible resilience." Kofi visited Amara regularly, feeling a special connection to the cub he had rescued. Each time he saw her growing stronger, he felt renewed purpose in his work. But he also knew that her rescue was just the beginning of a much larger battle against wildlife trafficking. The breakthrough in the case came 3 weeks after Amara's rescue. International investigators working with evidence gathered from the trap site conducted simultaneous raids in 5 countries. The results were staggering. They dismantled the trafficking network responsible for the illegal capture and sale of hundreds of wild animals over several years. More than 50 arrests were made, including high-ranking officials and wildlife departments who had been providing inside information to the traffickers. Millions of dollars in illegal profits were seized, along with equipment and vehicles used in the operations. But perhaps most importantly, they rescued 37 other animals that were being held for sale, including several more lion cubs who would now have a chance at freedom. Venter announced that his foundation would fund the rehabilitation and reintroduction of all the rescued animals, ensuring they would receive the best possible care. The investigation had also led to new international protocols for tracking and controlling the sale of wildlife capture equipment, making it much harder for traffickers to obtain the tools they needed. Amara's rescue saved far more than just one lion cub, Venter explained at a press conference. She became the key that unlocked an entire criminal network. Her suffering had meaning. It led to the protection of countless other animals. 6 months after her rescue, Amara had grown into a strong, healthy young lioness. The rehabilitation program had been incredibly successful, with Amara learning essential hunting and survival skills from other lions in the program. Plans were already underway for her eventual release into a protected area where she could live wild and free. But Amara's story had impact far beyond her individual rescue. The publicity surrounding her case and the subsequent investigation had led to increased funding for anti-poaching efforts across East Africa. New technology was being deployed to detect illegal traps, and international cooperation on wildlife crime had reached unprecedented levels. Kofi received a commendation for his role in the rescue, but he remained focused on his daily patrol work. Every morning, as he drove through the savannah, he carried with him the knowledge that his vigilance and dedication could make the difference between life and death for vulnerable animals. "Every animal we save matters," he reflected. "Amara taught me that sometimes one rescue can change everything." Dr. Mitchell continued her work at the veterinary facility, but with expanded resources thanks to international attention on wildlife trafficking, the clinic now served as a regional center for treating rescued animals and training other veterinarians in wildlife medicine. Marcus Venter returned to his conservation work with renewed energy. Amara's case had demonstrated the power of combining immediate rescue efforts with long-term systemic change. His foundation expanded its anti-trafficking programs and began working directly with local communities to provide alternative livelihoods for people who might otherwise turn to poaching. As for Amara herself, she grew into a magnificent lioness. The scars from her ordeal were barely visible beneath her golden coat, but the strength she had gained from surviving that terrible experience was evident in every movement. She had learned to hunt, to fight, and to lead. Most importantly, she had learned to trust again, not just humans who wanted to help, but other lions who would become her pride. The day of Amara's release was emotional for everyone who had been part of her journey. As the transport cage was opened in her new territory, a vast, protected area with abundant prey and no human threats, Amara paused for a moment at the threshold. She looked back once at the humans who had saved her life, as if acknowledging their role in her story, then bounded into the grassland toward her new life of freedom. She'll be monitored by satellite caller for the first year, Doctor, Mitchell explained to those gathered for the release. But she's shown every indication that she'll adapt well to wildlife. The pride in this area has already accepted her, and early signs suggest she may become a dominant female. Kofi watched through binoculars as Amara disappeared into the tall grass, his heart full of pride and hope. This was why he had become a ranger, for moments like this when human intervention could give wildlife a second chance at the life they deserved. The impact of Amara's rescue continued to ripple outward long after her release. The trafficking network that had been dismantled was unable to reconstitute itself due to continued international pressure and improved law enforcement cooperation. Equipment manufacturers implemented new tracking systems to prevent their products from reaching illegal buyers. Wildlife departments across East Africa underwent reforms to eliminate corruption and improve protection protocols. But perhaps most importantly, Amara's story had captured international attention and brought new supporters to the cause of wildlife conservation. Donations to anti-poaching organizations increased dramatically, allowing for expanded operations and better equipment for rangers like Kofi. The little cub who had been found trapped and dying in a hunter's net had become a symbol of hope, proof that with courage, compassion, and cooperation, humans could protect the incredible wildlife that shared their world. Her rescue had saved not just one life, but it created a cascade of positive changes that would protect countless animals for generations to come. In the wild, Amara thrived. Within 2 years, she had established herself as the matriarch of her pride and had given birth to 2 healthy cubs of her own. The cycle of life continued, but now with better protection and increased human awareness of the threats facing African wildlife. Sometimes on his morning patrols, Kofi would drive past the area where he had first found Amara. The spot had been turned into a small memorial, not to mark tragedy, but to celebrate the triumph of conservation over exploitation. A simple plaque told Amara's story, serving as a reminder to all who passed that every life mattered and that individual actions could create extraordinary change. The African sunrise painted the sky in brilliant oranges and golds as Kofi began. Another day of protecting the wildlife he had sworn to serve. Somewhere out there, Amara was teaching her cubs the skills they would need to survive in the wild. The circle was complete, but the work of conservation continued. One rescue, one day, one determined effort at a time. Through Amara's rescue, a complex network of wildlife trafficking had been exposed and dismantled. Corrupt officials had been brought to justice. International cooperation had been strengthened, and most importantly, a magnificent lioness had been given the chance to live free and pass that freedom on to her offspring. This was the power of conservation in action, the understanding that every animal saved, every trap destroyed, every trafficker arrested contributed to the larger goal of preserving Africa's incredible wildlife heritage for future generations. Amara's story proved that even in the face of sophisticated criminal organizations and systemic corruption, dedicated individuals working together could create meaningful change. The morning sun continued its climb across the African sky, casting long shadows across the savanna where lions roamed free. Protected by the vigilance of rangers like Kofi, the expertise of veterinarians like Dr. Mitchell, and the resources of conservationists like Marcus Venter, it was a new day full of possibilities, where the lessons learned from one small cub's rescue continued to protect wildlife across the continent and around the world.